Hello and welcome to College of Idaho Insights, a roundtable discussion of current issues of public interest. I'm Dustin Wunderlich, and today I'm joined by Professors Jasper LaKelsey, Rob Daly, and Carrie Hunter from the College of Idaho's Department of Political Economy, and Professor Stephen Mon from the college's Department of History. Today we'll be discussing education reform in Idaho, federal immigration reform, and civil disorder in Egypt. Jasper, Idahoans for Responsible Education Reform is closing in on signatures needed to put school reform on the November 2012 ballot. If that organization is successful in the effort, what should we expect next here in Idaho?
Well, I think actually there's been more discussion, more heat about the recall of Tom Luna than there has been about the referendum on repealing the education reform. And I think that's just makes it more personal. The thing is, since these reforms repeals won't be on the ballot until for another year and a half, it'll be more a question of what kind of changes have already been made. It's actually advantageous for those against the repeal because they'll be able to actually have implemented something. If it hasn't gone horribly wrong, then there shouldn't be that much of a problem. I think the real problem with all this referendum is it should have been done in November of 2010. If Tom Luna didn't come up with this idea in December, he had to have been coming up with this a long time before this, at least sometime, and that should have been part of his platform. He should have run on this as a candidate, and then let the people vote for him. Then there wouldn't be need for a recall or a repeal of the legislation that passed, because then he would have had a mandate.
So do you really think that I mean, I can understand there would have been a mandate per se, but do you really think that the policy is that unpopular?
Well, I think the irony of all of this is if Luna had run on this, he probably still would have been elected.
Yes, exactly.
But what has angered Idaho voters is the fact that this appears underhanded. It appears as if he had, sort of planned this, as Jasper says.
How angry are Idaho voters?
Well, I mean, sort of a week ago, they had 30,000 signatures. They need 48,000. There's 3 more weeks at this point. But that's actually pretty substantial for Idaho.
Well,
now, and the thing is, the recall of Luna, it doesn't really matter. They recall Luna, he's not going to lose that election.
No.
But
No,
the referendum on the laws, that could change the debate.
There's 3 different laws too, and I think the first 2, it's mainly the teachers are upset with the collective bargaining and the tenure for the most part, and I don't think they necessarily get repealed. I think overall, a majority, I think it's only teachers. It's the one about reducing the amount of money that goes to the state, to the schools, putting more computers in the classroom some way.
Well, and that's probably the most intelligent of the 3 bills, actually, in terms of responding to future needs. The first 2 are really union busting. I mean, that's
why they'll pass.
Is there any indication on just how unpopular the technology in the schools went? I mean, I've talked to people from rural areas who like the idea of having more internet classes. Because they don't have those opportunities.
And I think it's how you do it. I think it's better what passed than what was originally, because originally was forcing students to take a certain number of classes, internet classes, reducing the number of teachers, and this idea of trading teachers for laptops was not seen as a very good idea. Now giving laptops to the teachers instead, having more ideas, I think is more palatable.
Well, I think Carrie's hit on something. I think this is why they may get the votes, and we may see these on the ballot. But it's less likely they're going to pass because the organization to get these signatures is going to happen in the more populous counties. It's going to happen in Canyon County, it's going to happen in Ada County, it's going to happen in the north around Moscow, and they may get the signatures. But when all of Idaho is voting on this, and as you say, folks in rural areas, I think, are more supportive.
And it will be more of all of
I'm
Idaho.
not sure they'll pass.
If it's 2012, we've got presidential election, there'll be lots of people turning out, so it will, all the crazies will be
Steve, I talked to a conservative blogger who told me that he thinks history doesn't need to be taught by teachers, it can be just taught online.
I agree. Well, if he's the teacher.
It's fascinating. I mean, if you look at, and there's all of this uproar about math standards and science standards, how Americans are falling behind. American students are actually farther behind in history knowledge than they are in math or science, right? So we get proficiency in the 60 to 70% rate for math. We get it in 40 to 50% rate for historical knowledge.
But
So I
that's-
mean, this is.
But we're behind, it's not because we have history teachers teaching students, we have coaches teaching.
Well, I think this is a
kids.
problem.
And so I'm not convinced that a good online course would be worse than a high school coach teaching a history course who really doesn't give.
No,
That's
I
because-
actually agree. I think in fact, a lot of the talk about potentially ending the senior year of high school in favor of allowing advanced students to move on to higher education earlier, in sort of connection with the possibility of vocational training. The senior year for many students is simply a gap year, it's a holding year. Those kinds of significant reforms, I think, do need to be talked about.
But they haven't been.
Well, exactly,
Because
exactly,
too much
because
concentration
people don't like too
on
much change.
trashing the IEA and favoring some of these online companies.
Oh,
I
without a
have
doubt.
an idea for you. Okay, we don't send teachers to college to learn how to coach football, coach wrestling, coach these things. They learn these skills, but then we send them to high school and we pay them to do this. At the same time, they're asked to teach history or chemistry or whatever it is they're teaching. So why don't we just go for radical reform and privatize high school athletics? Allow the
College
communities-
athletics as well.
Allow the communities to take the athletic function of high schools over, have volunteer and some, lightly paid staff, family members, fathers, mothers, the people that really want to allow the teachers to actually do what they're trained to do, which is teach in the classroom. And if they want to be a full-time professional coach, then they can.
Outrageous.
No,
I
what other
think
profession demands that people become a teacher and a coach at the same time? No, we don't ask doctors to coach at the same time. Well, I coach Little League soccer.
Well, and
but I don't get paid for
and
that.
this is part of the reason why the charter school movement has gained such traction in Idaho. It's really fascinating. On the East Coast in Chicago, with President Obama, charter schools are about establishing reforms to inner city schools that have been underperforming, right? So giving those inner city parents a choice. In Idaho, it's been an opportunity for suburban flight out of the high schools that in many cases have become mediocre precisely because of the focus on sports, the focus on behavioral modification issues. And so suddenly you've got all these charter schools which aren't really responding and in fact don't require us to respond to the core problems at the heart of educational quality in our public schools.
So then the charter school parents, they will say, well, my taxpayer paying money is going to these high schools, so my kids have to be allowed to play on the high school sports team.
Yeah.
So they get the full-time teachers,
Yes.
and then they get the part-time high school coaches. It's not fair to the kids that are in the public schools.
Right, no, I agree entirely.
Where has the union been in terms of coming up with good reform ideas? And to me, that's part of the problem. The union gets all bent out of shape with this particular union-busting kind of proposals. But where's the union been? I mean, I don't see them coming up with any attempts. to
Or
try
even
to reform
other
some of the
politicians there
problems.
on the other side. I mean, we don't like these reforms, let's keep things as a status quo.
Right.
And I mean, I don't think
There's a
anybody
problem.
disagrees. But the problem is if you have the governor or Tom Luna say, well, it's either this or the status quo. There is no other option.
I think that's why.
Even though there's no other options on the table, but
Yeah, no one's
Well,
bringing
that's
it.
why Arnie Duncan has been
Right.
such a surprise. The Secretary of Education has been such a surprise to, in fact, teachers and the unions throughout the country because the Obama administration has said precisely this, right? We can't follow the same path. We need to have innovation. We need to have a transformative approach to American education. The biggest problem in American education systemically is, of course, that it is so fragmented in terms of local control and in terms of disparities of funding. But you're never going to tackle that kind of issue because it becomes
But that's a
an
federalism
of-
issue, that's
Right,
the issue.
exactly.
I mean, well, you get to the issue, same thing as with healthcare or something. Where in the Constitution does it says the federal government should be involved in education? It doesn't, it's a local.
It's not just
system.
federal, though, it can be local as well. I can sit at a game at Caldwell High School, look across the valley, and I can see the lights on at Valley View, completely different district, completely different funding. Why don't we consolidate these?
That's up to the state.
I know, that's.
And the reason we don't do it is because I've got to go watch my team.
That's right.
Mhm.
And we can't get rid of Notice and Parma and have them go to Caldwell, because then our town will lose our identity because we don't have high
Tribalism.
school.
You're saying it's all about tribalism.
Basically, it's
Hmm.
not really that much different than Northwest Pakistan.
Well, speaking of some of the issues between state and federal control, one of the things that's been in the news recently is the DREAM Act and the reintroduction of the DREAM Act, which would provide a pathway for illegal aliens in this country to citizenship. What are the chances, Carrie, for passage of the DREAM Act this year or anytime soon?
I don't think the chances are very good. I mean, Obama initiated his DREAM Act speech recently by saying the federal government has done its job, we've secured the border. And Republicans aren't buying that, certainly people living there.
Well, he has, how much more secure do they have to be?
Yeah, in the last 5 years, illegal immigration has gone down 50%. I mean, there's
How
half
much
the
more?
number of people coming across the border in 5 years.
Other than the
So
border
it's
between
not
North and
about real
South.
numbers.
Besides the border between North and South Korea, I mean, where is there more?
Now, this is about
Control.
mobilizing, right, sort of a certain voting blocks with an appeal to nativism.
Oh,
appeal
well,
to
but he's doing the
hyper-nationalism.
same thing.
Right. Well, I know, he's trying to mobilize, in
The
fact, right,
Latino
so
community.
the Latino community, which has been a great friend. And so, I mean, it's about
Obama's
playing,
in campaign.
it's about playing politics. But it's, I think, really, really unfortunate that, in fact, and so one of the significant problems that the country potentially has, which is maintaining, right, sort of a high level of skill in the workforce, right, sort of is being shoved aside because of this partisan squabble. We're talking about kids who want to go to college and have to perform in college. We're talking about kids who want to go into our military, right, so who want to serve the country and gain an access to citizenship through that route. And I think it's really, really, sort of sad,
Yeah,
frankly,
but I
that
do think
this is
because
going to
it
be
is-
sunk because of that
Because
politics.
yeah, it will be something, because it really is politics.
But you have, the other side saying, you have people who have played by the rules, who have followed how you're supposed to come in here, and how come they're not given?
Well,
this
if there was a
opportunity?
real guest worker program and realistic quotas for immigration, then that might be one thing, but they're so low, right, in terms of the size of the economy and the size
Well,
of
and
need
guess
in the labor
what?
market.
Have people
that-
come in here, work in my fields, clean my house, and then go home?
No, and that's.
No, I know, and that's the,
right
look,
there.
not
well,
us.
exactly.
This is
And
one
what-
that has
and what's
those
happened in
workers.
America,
But they don't
what's
understand.
happened
No,
in
they wanna
America
come work and go
historically,
home.
Right.
since
So
the
they're given
1850s,
power.
is you've gotten immigrant groups who have come in. They have worked their way into the middle class through precisely this set of methods. The
Like
Irish,
Jasper's
the Italian, like Jasper's family, right? So Jewish communities, Polish communities. And now suddenly we're saying, well, we're going to cut all that off because this is, sort of a flow that is going to destroy America. And I think it's a completely unconvincing argument.
Well, I think it's unconvincing, and I think it's also intellectually dishonest. Businesses like to have cheap labor who don't have a lot of political power.
Right.
And as long as they're illegal, they can
Well,
talk all they want about, oh, we can't have these illegal, but on the other hand, they benefit by.
Why do you
having
think there hasn't
these
been
illegal.
an Arizona-style law passed in Idaho?
I know.
It's the farmers.
Yeah, it's-
The farmers have completely, the farmers in Darien have totally stopped that. Because if you do, because first of all, what's happening in Arizona, the immigrants are all leaving.
Yeah, they're
You
not
did the
sure.
same thing in Idaho, we'd have Sugar Beach.
Well, they're
Rock.
also the first ones to stand up and say the federal government has too much power. Washington, D.C., right, sort of is pushing around the states. And at the same
Well,
time, on the other hand,
this is a federal government.
take subsidies for sugar beets, take subsidies for agricultural crops of all kinds. And so, again, there's a double game being played by many. And I think ultimately, in many cases, they don't understand that that's actually happening. Because people tend to focus on what their area of interest is. They learn a lot about it. They don't see the bigger picture. Well, the irony is that in terms of the national interest, the DREAM Act isn't even the biggest issue when it comes to immigration. It's actually providing visas and paths to citizenship for PhD-holding entrepreneurs, foreign students, right, sort of who've gained their degrees, their expertise, their knowledge in American universities, which have the best research programs in the world. And then we say, well,
Can't
go back
say
to
it.
India,
Right.
go back to
Come
Indonesia.
here, we'll
And so,
train you,
right,
and then you go away.
and American politicians are perfectly willing to cut off the nation's nose to spite its face over this politics.
But it
It's-
seems the DREAM Act, though, can be combined with education reform at a certain level, because if you're trying to say, look, these kids that come here if they don't graduate from high school, they're not going to be eligible for these kind of benefits that could incentivize high school, high schools and the populations and the families to make sure these kids that have a high dropout rate can get through the system.
So you're saying the federal government should take over the education as well?
No, I'm saying that the people that are against it ought to be rethinking about why they're against it. Maybe they can help their communities if they actually reconsider their position on it.
Maybe with the kids who aren't undocumented workers, we do the same thing. If they drop out, we throw them out of the country. That might be incentive.
Let's break the social contract down entirely, Jasper. That's an excellent idea.
If we have these immigrant kids who are working real hard and want to stay here, that's good. Some of the
So the kids who fail your classes, they should be deported.
some of them I'd like.
Are you calling anybody particular professors' kids?
This
Slacker rock and roll.
Exactly.
Kids,
Mhm.
they
Those,
just rock
those
and roll.
noise surf punk rockers, right? So they have no place in
Jasper
this
can call it the
country.
Nightmare Act.
Well, moving into international rules, we're also seeing in recent days here an increase in civil disorder in Egypt in the wake of the recent revolution there. What needs to happen in Egypt to make a successful transition to a state of stability, Rob?
Probably about 20 years. It's no transitions.
A new
to
Pharaoh.
democracy.
Pharaoh would help. Crack down on this.
No transitions, are very quick. They take a long time to develop. I think the long-term prospects look actually pretty good for Egypt. I don't think that what we see now should be viewed as the harbinger of things to come. I think there are two groups that are clearly power players here. One is the military, the other is the Muslim Brotherhood. I think there's a lot of misperceptions about the Muslim Brotherhood and what they stand for and what they're about. They really want to be involved in the policy process and the political process. They've formed a party. I think the most important thing is if the military allows elections to evolve and develop organically that in the next year or so without too much protest, then we just need to get through that first period, and then once we see that, the opportunity for for players to play within a system of rules can exist.
What are the odds that that'll happen in the next year?
I don't know. The next year, I don't know. It could take a year, it could take 3 years, 5 years. It could be,
Is there a
forward,
chance
one
that it
step
could
back
really
kind
end
of
up,
thing.
really becoming repressive?
I don't think with Egypt society that's the case. I think that there's too many modernizers in that society that want to see the
They have middle class and educated class
Right.
there too.
Educated class.
It's a much bigger country than people realize. There are 80 million people in Egypt. I mean, it's the size of Germany. And it has, as you say, potential to have that kind of modernizing society in it. Lots of educated people, lots of modernizers. What happens in places like Syria,
Or
however,
Yemen, I think is worse. I mean, they have
right, so
no
that's
middle class.
the joke
Libya,
in the deck.
Even Libya, I mean, is there much of a middle class or
Right.
more intelligentsia there?
No, I think that an interesting model to look at for Egypt is actually Indonesia. It's a little bit different
Southeast
society,
Asia.
but you've had a military government in power for a long, yeah, of course.
Right.
That's all you
Yeah,
know.
Talk about something you know.
Yeah, you got a military government in charge of the world's largest Muslim society. And once they were put out of the way, you had the rise of political Islam, but they're playing by the rules. They form political parties, they get involved, and they're not the majority. The more conservative Islamists are not the majority. They haven't won in the political party process. I don't think the same would happen. I think the same would happen in Egypt if we just get to that point.
Well, and that's why I think we need to be very careful in foreign policy, because the reality is that internal transformations in modernizing and liberalizing communities are probably the most important component in that transference to a stable democratic country. I remember, Mikhail Gorbachev was asked in 1991, what's the difference between Prague Spring in 1968 when the Soviet tanks rolled into Czechoslovakia and perestroika in 1985? And he said, well, sort of at this point it's 19 years. That is, right, sort of as that development went on in the Soviet Union, as you see, right, sort of people like Gorbachev, the second generation, right, sort of after the Great Patriotic War, coming into power, seeing the comparatives with the West, right, you see these internal transformations, and then when the change occurs, you have elites that are, you know, sort of in place to actually take over and run governments. The danger, right, sort of is precisely radical, bloody revolution, which unleashes forces that you can't really predict. And so you see these kinds of parallels, right? I mean, people fear that, you know, ultimately with the military taking over in Egypt, you know, you might see, right, the Napoleon outcome of revolution occur at some point, that you'll see another Nasser. But
even Mubarak
That's why I
was
say-
military too.
That's why I say that the military is the real determinant here, not the Muslim Brotherhood.
Yes.
They've
I
renounced the
agree.
use of violence. They're further to the middle than Hamas is,
Mhm.
for example.
Yes.
They're willing to play by the rules. It's just up to the military not to back them into a corner or force them into some sort of oppositional role where they can't play within
Right.
the system.
Yeah.
And if they do that, they could get some more blood and probably.
Well, and you see
I
this-
think the people need to be patient with the military as well.
Right, I agree. But you see these fascinating ideological shifts that are going on, and ideology always shifts radically, right, sort of in times of great turmoil. And so, you know, sort of Nasser's regime and reign in Egypt sort of ended ultimately with the Six-Day War, humiliation, right, sort of a ruined economy, and Anwar Sadat's, you know, decision to modernize and to in fact engage in a peace process, right, sort of really brought Egypt a long way. The question is, you know, sort of which of those roads will Egypt follow from this point onward? And I think you're absolutely right. The military at this point is the critically determining factor. And they've shown a lot of restraint, and they've shown a lot of willingness to actually, right, so
But I think
create
then you have-
structures for a democratic transition.
But then you look next door in Libya, where is the institution to do something like that? The military's mainly Hessians, basically, who are mercenaries.
Sudanese, right.
You're right, the Sudanese. So where's the civil society, which Mubarak actually allowed to some
Mhm.
extent in Egypt? There's nothing there, so
This
this
isn't going to be a domino effect of democracy coming more.
No, because I think people look
I don't
at
think
it,
so either.
the countries are so different.
I think it can be over time.
Right.
I don't think we'll see it in the next 5 years, but over the next 20 years, I think if Egypt takes the lead here,
Right.
then you'll see other countries and other populations wanting to have it like the Arabs have it in Egypt.
So is this
Right.
evidence that the Bush doctrine actually potentially playing itself out?
No, not at all. I mean, the Bush doctrine is to use foreign policy in order to oppose democracy more forcefully. This is more organic.
Seen it grow organically from the grassroots upwards.
You know, one of the things that's so amazing about this is these are leaderless transitions. Who's the leader of the democratic transition in Egypt? You can't name the person.
And you look at anything from Bush, whether it's his doctrine or at least his surrogates who are still talking about it, they were upset. They thought that Obama should have been supporting Mubarak much more.
Well, the realists, yeah.
Right.
But, you know, that was the mistake to get, he's a friend of ours.
Well, and it's also interesting
So
to
it's
wonder whether we're seeing a transition in the Muslim world in general with regard to a sea sort of change in attitudes towards jihadist Islamic militancy. I think it's fascinating to see the Palestinians, for example, transitioning to a policy just in the past few days of massed, unarmed, right, sort of protests along the Israeli border, recognizing that in fact the intifada, the approach to militant and violent resistance and attempts at revolutionary transformation ultimately gets you nowhere.
And
in a
Israelis
world
have come
of
forward.
such effective projection of
Israelis
military
came forward and
force.
said, we don't know how to deal with this.
Mhm.
Get back to us in a couple days.
Yes.
I don't know how to deal with this.
It's fascinating.
How do they deal with, it's like, how do you deal with Gandhi?
Mhm.
You know, how do you deal with Martin Luther King?
Right.
They're hard to deal with. John Brown's easy to deal with. Just hang him.
Mhm.
So,
Yeah, and then,
sorry,
and, then
to
end,
restore
and then
that.
end with a bloody civil war.
Yes.
Exactly.
Well, thank you all today for participating in the inaugural College of Idaho Insights discussion. And thank you to our audience for listening today. To learn more about the College of Idaho, visit collegeofidaho.edu.